The future has arrived. As the world and humanity itself moves faster and faster into unimaginable possibilities, old institutions that built connection and shaped our sense of meaning are falling by the wayside. In their wake, profound questions about ethics, our purpose, and spirituality demand new answers. Join your host, Scott Mason, in Season 2 of the Purpose Highway podcast. We will explore how these social changes will revolutionize our society. We will learn how they impact our own search for connection and meaning. And we will hear stories of influencers whose lives have had radical change from the inside and found profound connection to others and themselves through a new definition of meaning. The future has arrived. Are you ready?
When you're racing down the Purpose Highway, we want to make sure you're healthy and happy every step of the way. That's why we're proud to partner with It's NOLA, 21st century plant-based healthy granola snack bites made with real ingredients and audacious flavor. It's NOLA crafts small batch hand-rolled granola balls that are vegan, gluten-free, and naturally low in sugar. It's NOLA's delightful bites come in 3 flavors: luscious cranberry coconut, sassy mango masala, and dark, decadent, chewy chocolate. It's NOLA is available to both individual customers and for wholesale accounts at itsnola.com. That's ITSNOLA.com. Guests on this show are already enjoying this delicious snack. Check out It's NOLA's website for yourself and find out how good it is. Hello everybody, it's Scott Mason revving up for another race down the Purpose Highway. Now if you like what we're doing, be sure to subscribe and give us a thumbs up on YouTube or a positive review on Apple, because we love reading that. We really do. And sitting next to me in the front seat today is Joseph McGuire. Joseph is a facial analysis expert, and he conducts online communication skills training, as well as works with clients to facilitate building exceptional relationships via the company that he owns, Clearsight Communications. He's also an author. And Joseph, I'll just tell the audience, I'll keep it real with them. It's very seldom that I meet with someone and say, I have to rearrange my entire schedule within the next 7 days to have you on the show. But yes, when it came to you, I made that happen because I believe in your message and I'm excited to be a vehicle for you. Welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you, Scott. I'm honored to be here, genuinely honored.
Thank you. Now, I like to play around with folks so we can get to know each other a little bit better and the audience can get to know you. And we do that a lot of times by sharing stories from Greek myths. But you're going to outdo everyone else who's appeared on this show, right? You're too good for those Greek myths. You've got your own myths. Where are you, by the way, where are you calling in from?
I'm in Dublin, Ireland, capital city.
All right. Which is a beautiful city. If people have not been there, you absolutely need to go. So, I think you might have an Irish something or another to get us starting with the ball play here. Go!
Absolutely, yes. I love the story. Well, there's so many stories about Fionn McCool, who's one of the great Irish mythological history heroes. And there's one particular story from his childhood. I think he was supposed to have been around the age of 6 or thereabouts, and he was apprenticed to a poet called Finnegas. And they were on the banks of the River Boyne, which is one of the main rivers in the east of the country. And Finnegas told Fionn this story that there was a legendary salmon in the river, and wisdom had, or story had it, that the salmon was the salmon of knowledge. It had eaten hazelnuts which had fallen into the river from a magical hazel tree, and when it digested the hazelnuts, it had attained the wisdom of the world. And the story was that whoever caught the salmon and ate of its flesh would attain that wisdom. So it was Finnegas's deepest desire to catch the salmon and attain the wisdom. And they spent day after day after day by the riverside. And one day, Finnegas saw eyes looking back at him from the water, jumped in, and somehow or other caught the salmon, much to his great surprise, caught the salmon, brought it to the bank, and gave Fionn instructions to cook it, but under no circumstances to eat it, under absolutely no circumstances to eat it. And while Fionn was preparing the fish, cooking it, Finnegas went to his home to collect something or other. The fish was turning on a spit, and as it was turning, Fionn accidentally touched it with his thumb. And of course, it was hot, so he stuck his thumb in his mouth.
Wow.
And he thought nothing of it, but when Finnegas came back, he knew that there was something different. So Fionn told him exactly what had happened. And Finnegas said, well, you'd better eat the fish now. And when he ate the fish, initially again, he thought nothing had happened. But when he sucked his thumb again, everything changed and he had attained all the wisdom. And I love that story for a number of reasons. Number one, he broke the rules. He disobeyed. And I've got a kind of rebellious tendency in me somewhere. He was curious, and the wisdom came unexpectedly, which is the way it so often happens for us in life anyway. We're working, we're concentrating, focusing on one area, and suddenly pearls of wisdom drop in unexpectedly when we're doing something completely unrelated.
That was incredible. So there are a couple of things in there that I have to comment on. First of all, the image of the eyes looking back at him in the river. Mm-hmm. What a stirring and dramatic image. And I imagine perhaps, and I'd love to know whether you have thoughts about this, if at all, that in a way that is wisdom, understanding that it is, that the person who wants to become wise is ready to receive it and being there and literally making itself seen, which is a concept that I don't know that we often discuss, at least in modern culture. But that is what I'm hearing when that particular detail runs through my mind. Does that particular part of the story resonate with you? Does that interpretation mean anything to you?
Yeah, it does. It's significant that people had sought the salmon for a long time, and nobody had, never mind caught it, nobody had caught sight of it. And suddenly it was there. You know the old saying that when the student is ready, the teacher arrives, and it's like the salmon somehow connected, and the synchronicity of the moment. And the salmon on some level became aware of its own purpose, which was to serve and to provide that wisdom, to share the wisdom, and to have the wisdom spread from there, because obviously it had limited resource or limited purpose in the river as such.
And so therefore, being this embodiment of wisdom, knowing that the human that it was looking at probably would kill it and eat it, it was nonetheless willing to make a sacrifice so that that wisdom could be shared outside of that river.
Yeah, absolutely.
Really deep. The other thing that I have to point out is that in classical mythology, disobedience of the gods is punished severely. And prophecy always comes true, but never in someone's favor. So really what those stories were telling the people at that time were to avoid risk, or at least to assume risk, but with a healthy sense of humility. The Greeks in particular hated arrogance. And they have a zillion myths about people that fly too close to the sun or try to get to Olympus or boast that they're prettier than some goddess. And the next thing you know, they're turned into Medusa. This is quite a different tradition and a different message that comes through that myth based on your interpretation of it, which to me is quite interesting. There's an element of acceptance of what happened, rather than some divine punishment coming down and striking them both dead, for instance, or something.
Yeah, well, of course, Fionn was 6 years old or thereabouts, so he was obviously an innocent, and he wouldn't have been aware, presumably, of disobedience as such, and it wasn't intentional disobedience. It was just the most natural thing for a child to do, acting as a child. So it can be reasonably said that he was purely acting out his nature. He wasn't rebelling as such, even though I like to think he was.
Totally. Maybe he just didn't know it. But I will say this. Years ago when I was, days ago, when I was in my 40s, my early 40s, 48 hours ago, I decided to take Brazilian jiu-jitsu classes. And you start with a white belt, and the white belt mentality. I read some books about martial arts at the time, and the white belt mentality was stepping back into your inner child and being exactly what you're saying, open to receive. And so the age issue or the age representation in the story also is significant if we buy the idea that, which it sounds like you do, that myths are really speaking to the entire human condition and they exist on the level of metaphor. Martial arts, the white belt is the metaphor for regressing into your childhood. And the black belt, of course, is when you finally are ready to begin to be an adult. I'm hearing maybe something about connecting childhood mentality or learning with wisdom and access to it in your story.
Absolutely. Again, I suppose I come back to life experience in that one. And for me, so much of the learning in life is actually from unlearning. And unlearning the conditioning we've grown up with, but also the conditioning that was passed on to us through many generations. And we're seeing in the world today just how dysfunctional so many societies have become. And to me, so much of what's required now is an unlearning, a returning to that, if you want to, innocence is not the word I'm looking for. It's more a lightness of being, a lightness in our awareness that allows us to come from the heart, that allows us to really engage our heart in our daily being, in our daily communication, our daily interactions, whether on or offline, that brings if you like, a childlike joy into being. That brings, again, innocence isn't the word and purity is not the word, but they're close. They're somewhere close to the words I'm looking for. And that idea of the white belt. And if you look at Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table, Gawain was the pure knight. So you have that idea of purity. And the returning to that, and the stories of mythology are bringing us through the journey and all the challenges of the journey. And we've experienced more than a few challenges in our own lives, but bringing us through that and out of any place of pain or victimhood or any of that stuff that we've tended to carry or that generations before us have carried, and into a place of not just acceptance, but acceptance and awareness of the deep, deep beauty, the irrepressible beauty within us that is there to be shared, and that's what really we need to transform the world into now.
There's a lot that you just said, and there are tentacles that could be pulled out in a million different directions. We are going to go back to a lot of those tentacles as our conversation proceeds. However, let's begin focusing the initial tentacle by talking about some of the themes of the show. Mm-hmm. Theme number one, the silent revolution. You're, as we mentioned earlier, from Ireland, a country that has been more dramatically shaken by the silent revolution, or at least in a public sense, dramatically impacted by it than perhaps any other country in the Western world. The silent revolution is the decline of the major historical civic institutions. The big one is organized religion, but there are others as well, is facilitators of connection between human beings in their search for meaning. And by meaning, for the purposes of this show, I have meant purpose, spirituality, and ethical grounding. Theme number 2 is the secret plague. The plague of alienation and separation that has been escalating for years now in the Western world. This is being taped during the COVID pandemic. However, the only thing that COVID has done, in my opinion, has been to exacerbate everything, or maybe speed it up or make it undeniable. Yep. The alienation and separation that people have been feeling has been documented both in studies of the workplace, trust in business, trust in institutions like government, involvement in a whole host of other civic organizations, even political involvement. And that alienation leads to cynicism, it leads to division, it leads to separation from the heart or from each other's heart. And it goes to what you do fundamentally for a living. We're talking about, and you mentioned in your earlier part of this conversation, being centered in the heart. Particularly, and I know that your work relates primarily to communication, but when it comes to finding purpose and having how we show up in this world connected to that. I'm curious, what are your, and then we particularly, by the way, talked about it with regards to this idea of the inner child coming out. Do you think that some of these organized religious institutions have lost sight of their own inner child or sense of wonder, maybe by becoming overly legalistic or overly bureaucratic or through a whole host of other things? And if so, how do you feel that that's played out as a leadership matter in ways that might be contributing to either the silent revolution or the secret plague?
Wow, that's deep stuff. Yes, definitely. Certainly what I'd be most familiar with here in Ireland would be the Catholic Church. I was raised in a Catholic family, a very conservative Irish Catholic family. So I had direct first-hand experience. Like one small story from childhood was in the mid-60s, up to the mid-60s in Ireland, every Mass was 1 hour long. And at some point in the mid-60s, I can't remember exactly when, the weekday Masses were changed to be half an hour each. And in our family, on Christmas Day, we had to go to Mass before we saw our presents or before we had breakfast. But in weekdays, we had to stay for 2 Masses so that we could get the full value. And as children, to put it mildly, that was not a good experience. I've never heard of anybody else having the same experience. But that was...
Yeah, I was going to ask, like as an adult, did you ever look back and say, yo, Mom and Dad, come on?
Well, I mean, my father's long gone, and my mother's still very fervent, conservative Irish Catholic, so you just don't go there. But but this was obviously long before the institution started to become, the cracks and the flaws in the institution started to become more and more apparent and unmissable. I think even as a child, I was tuned in to the fact that, like, we had to go to mass on a very regular basis and go to confession and all that stuff. And even as a child, something just didn't resonate as being true for me. To me, it was stale. It was very tired. The priests I was meeting were just tired. It was just habit, stale, tired habit. But what started to emerge really from I think the late 80s onwards, and it just became like an avalanche, was the amount of sexual abuse and other forms of institutionalized abuse in various forms that had operated with it under the auspices of the church, and that applies both to priests and situation and places run by nuns, and and we're still discovering more and more of that, to the point where it became inescapable to people, even absolutely resolute, conservative, utterly committed Catholics of my mother's and father's generation, that there was something seriously amiss and something seriously lacking, and that there had been so much, there's so much documented now that so much had been swept under the carpet, that there had been knowledge, there had been knowledge, like it's on the record that there was knowledge of systematic child abuse going back into the late 1920s. That was in schools, in industrial schools, where so often children were removed from their parents, often single mothers, and just put into these industrial schools or orphanages, and that was the end of the relationship with the parent in many cases, and then the children were just there to be used, and that's, unfortunately, that's the simple fact of it. So the dissolution of trust that had been there has been absolutely immense. Now, there's still a lot of people who do participate in the rituals and all of that. How much absolute belief there is, I don't know, because there is a rebellious aspect to Irish people, even conservative Irish people, where they will apparently pay attention to the rules, but then they will do their own thing anyway. So, but certainly the level of respect, and I suppose one indication of that is the number of what are called vocations for the priesthood here have dropped, have gone through the floor. The levels of attendance at particularly Sunday Mass have gone through the floor. Some churches have closed, some parishes have, the numbers are so small of people attending, particularly in the urban areas. So many of the priests operating in Ireland now are actually from abroad, which is kind of strange when you think about our history. But but that has all contributed towards a breakdown, because that level of trust that was so deeply embedded, trust and belief and obedience. Obedience was a huge part of it, obeying the rules and just completely accepting the church as the authority beyond politicians, but the church in particular, and that has certainly diminished hugely.
Hey, it's funny that you mentioned the hour-long duration of Mass. I grew up in a Protestant church that was kind of fundamentalist and had some hell and doom and fire and brimstone preachers. And those sermons went on forever, and the church services were so long. Now, I was raised in it because my mother went to that church. My father actually was Catholic. And I loved going to the Catholic masses because they were only an hour long, and you could time your clock to that. It was liberating to only have to be there for an hour. That being said, I wasn't going every day. I might have felt a little bit different after that, I've got to admit. There was knowledge of these events going on. It was well documented. People knew. Knowledge versus wisdom.
Yeah.
The institution was holding knowledge, but it hadn't tasted wisdom. Yeah. And thinking about the story that you told earlier from mythology, and thinking about the theme of wisdom, How ironic is it that what was being abused were children who themselves, thinking about this symbolically, had access due to their mindset and a willingness to embrace wisdom. So knowledge was devouring or abusing or robbing itself and others of access to wisdom. You talk about connection, trust, leadership, communication. We're not going to just, unless you want to, then we will, but we don't need to necessarily just focus on the church, but it's an interesting case in point. As someone who focuses on leadership, who literally has a program that profiles people and looks at their strengths and weaknesses, or however you want to frame it, to assess what sorts of roles they might be good at, what would you say that the leadership of an institution like the Catholic Church that wants to regain credibility, what could it even begin to do? If people aren't able to find that sort of connection to each other outside of these institutions, what can, if anything, those institutions do to begin to repair that from a communications and leadership perspective?
I think it's very difficult when an organization reaches that size because the bureaucracy is so deeply embedded. And by definition, within, as I understand it, within the makeup of human beings, when we form a tribe, we want to preserve the tribe. And anybody who steps outside the tribe tends to be ostracized. So the tribe is protecting itself, maintaining itself. And when it becomes, as you used the term legalistic earlier, when it becomes legalistic and bureaucratic, it's almost like this ship which is maybe run aground, not even in the sea anymore, but has run aground, and the propellers or the whatever are still going, the engines are still going, but it's not moving anywhere. And my own view on it, for what it's worth, is that the church needs to become a lot smaller. It needs to become more just localized, and it needs to allow, and I don't know that it will, but it needs to allow local priests, local nuns deal with the realities on the ground, and I was going to say finally, but properly be of service to the people, the real needs of the people in their communities, not what the church says the needs are, the great edifice of the church, but the real needs of the people, and actually genuinely and completely and fully serve. And it has, to a large extent, certainly as an institution, it has ceased to do that, in my view.
Do you believe that there is and I'll walk that back a little bit. Servant leadership is a catchphrase they hear all the time. And everyone says, I'm here to serve. Even if you're the most selfish dictator that there is. I'm here to serve, I'm here to serve, I'm here to serve. If you view yourself as having leadership potential, and you understand that good leadership is there to serve, how do you make sure that what you are doing as a leader is actually of service, that you're really not just in one way or another feeding your ego and dressing it up as service, number one. And then number two, and if you want me to go back to this, let me know and I'll ask whatever part you don't, whatever, just I want to make sure that you're able to process everything. If you are in a situation where you are, let's say you're voting, or you are making a promotional or hiring decision for a leader within a company, how do you make sure that that person really is approaching the role in a genuine sense of service?
Okay, that's there's a couple of serious questions in there. Absolutely, yes. To me, one issue is accountability. No matter who you are you accountable to? Who is there in your life who can tell you that you are talking complete BS, or that you are not living up to your potential, or that you are not being true to yourself, you're not serving your purpose? And everybody needs somebody like that, whether we like it or not. And if we don't like it, it's saying something about us. Like, I'm reminded that returning victorious Roman generals, when they'd be coming into Rome, they had a servant in their chariot whose role was to whisper in their ear, "All glory is fleeting." I'm reminded in the medieval time, medieval times, the role of the jester was not just to entertain in general terms, but was also to mock the ruler, to remind them to be humble. Now, obviously, not all of them were humble by any means, but that was part of the role of the jester. That the jester had full permission to serve that role. And if we are real, if we are genuine, if we're truly living up to who we can be, then we are willing, not just willing, we are committed to having somebody in our lives who can call us on our BS. And there's a need to have a sense of humor, a vital need to have a sense of humor about who and how we are. And then the other thing about it is, it's not, as you so rightly say, there are enough people talking about servant leadership and enough people just talking, but making empty noise. So don't judge me by my words. Are my words and my actions congruent and consistent? If they're not, call me out on it. You,
as we mentioned a little earlier, do these personal profiling services for executive leaders. Could you talk to us a little bit about exactly what that is, what that entails, and what it looks like day to day for an organization that might hire you, or that might be wanting to assess the leadership capacity within its ranks?
Sure. Okay. Well, the first thing is, in terms of me working with somebody, they have to have three qualities. They have to be curious, they have to be open-minded, and they have to have a sense of humor. If those three qualities aren't present, it's going to be quite a challenge for us to work together. That's the first.
And why
thing.
Those three things? Can I ask?
Yeah, because it means, for me, if just as I've said, I have to be open to be challenged. I have to be open-minded to the fact that I can be wrong, that I can be deluding myself that I'm living up to my purpose, my intentions, my motivation, my values, and I have to be able to laugh at myself. So if I don't have those things, then there's questions about me. So to me, they're just they're absolutely non-negotiables. And then when it comes to assessing people, I've been working with the ancient Chinese tradition of reading faces. I've been teaching it since 1985 at this stage, so I've been around a while. I once had hair, believe it or not. So it's a 3,000-year-old tradition, and it's been used continually in Chinese, not just in Chinese medicine, because I learned it as a diagnostic technique initially, but in Chinese business and Chinese politics over 3,000 years. I mean, the documentation goes back that far. And the understanding is that our static facial features, before we even move a single muscle, reveal a huge amount of information about our personality, our character, behavior style, how we communicate, both in terms of how we absorb and process information, and then how we externalize it, stress triggers and responses, a lot about our emotional history, which will indicate where we are in life, and how fully and willingly we are to commit to something, whether that be a relationship or a purpose, a job, etc. And a lot more besides. A lot about our ancestral history, our relationship with our parents is revealed in our face. So
wow.
When I'm looking at somebody, and it could be on a screen like this, or it could be person to person, I'm assessing a lot of detail, a lot of information. There's an old saying that your face never lies. And whether people are aware of it or not, we're communicating so much before we speak, before we move a single muscle. And I've also worked with micro expressions, body language, working with not. I don't pay so much attention to what people say as how they say it. Patterns, rhythms, tone of rhythm of speech, tone of voice, gaps in speech, and dissonance between speech and body language and expression. I'm paying attention to all of those things, which are all very, very revealing, and often far more revealing than what people actually say. So when I'm making an assessment, I obviously have to be conscious of the culture of the organization, and what is it, what's required for an individual to fit into the organization as well as into the role. So once I'm clear about the culture, it's easy to say whether somebody will fit and how they will fit, and whether they will work well with people, communicate with people, interact well with people, whether they fully commit to things like whether they fully commit to a project, or whether they're people who are micromanagers, whether they're people who kind of lose interest halfway during a project, which is frequent, we know. The people who are so detail-oriented that they forget that they're dealing with people. There's so many variations that are just available and visible, clearly visible in facial features.
This is so juicy. I can't wait to dig into it a little bit more. And I know the audience is probably holding onto the edge of their seat with bated breath to have all their questions answered. Well, anyone watching or listening, you're going to have to wait a couple more seconds. We are going to get to the things that you need to have answered. And I can relate to that. But let's talk a little bit more about another background question I've got. How on earth did you end up learning about this? How does some random person in Dublin, Ireland, end up studying this ancient Chinese technique, and, by the way, being good at it enough, or being good enough at it so that you could be out there working and getting corporations to hire you to use it? There's got to be a story here. Come on.
Okay, I was reading people as a small child, but I couldn't have told you what I was doing. I just instinctively knew a lot about people. Like I've memories of sitting on the floor in my parents' home when adults would come in and the adults would gather. And it wasn't, when I say knowing about people, it wasn't like their intimate secrets, but I knew a lot about character.
Right.
I knew a lot about who was being honest and who was something not quite true there, things like that. When I was a small child, my father used to bring me to football matches, like soccer in particular, and I could see a lot of the patterns that were going to develop in games, who was going to move where, again, which players were really committed and who were, as we say in Ireland, throwing shapes, but not really getting stuck in. And then,
really?
Oh yeah, absolutely. But I just thought everybody was doing this. I just thought this was the norm for everybody. And I guess it was somewhere in my teens I realized, something a little bit different here. But it wasn't until I moved to London in 1981. I left Ireland, went to Israel, spent time in Israel on a kibbutz first, and then I moved to London. And I happened to be eating in this centre in London one evening. It was a centre for whole foods and what have you, and natural foods and natural living. And I was sitting at a table, and I just happened to get talking to the guy sitting across from me. We'd never met each other before. And it turned out he was from Denmark. He'd just arrived over to do a particular course. And the guy came by the table, and my new friend called him over and pointed to me and said, "This guy wants to join the course." This was the first I'd heard of the course, and the course was starting that evening. So I had a brief conversation, said, "Yeah, I joined the course, fine." And I assumed actually it was going to be a lot about natural foods, which is what I was really into at the time, because that was already making a big difference in my life. But it turned out that a part of the course was actually training in shiatsu, and part of the shiatsu training was the diagnostic use of reading faces. And so when I was introduced to that was just the light bulb moment for me. So that's where it started.
How have you utilized this skill in workplace settings with the clients that you have? Like, I'm calling you up and I say, I want to have some facial reading services along with a diagnostic of my leadership team, let's say. And tell me your process. Oh, and by the way, while you answer that question, tell me, how do you not get people to freak out? I feel really naked right now. You're reading my face. You're exposing everything about me. I want my face to be a mask. Right now I've learned I can't do that anymore. What do you tell me?
Well, that's the thing. Everybody wears a mask. Everybody wears a mask. You know, the famous English actor Peter Sellers, he once wrote his autobiography called The Mask Behind the Mask, because he was so insecure he didn't actually know who he was. He was all these other characters.
Wow.
But everybody wears a mask, and everybody, no matter who you are, no matter where you're from, no matter what level of success you've attained in your life, has some level of insecurity about something or other in their life. Everybody, no exceptions. So for me, when I meet people, I get wide and varied reactions. I get the people who are really get it and are really into it, the people who are curious, skeptical, and the people who are completely dismissive. I get all that. And the people who are terrified, afraid that I'm going to be looking into their soul and seeing all their darkest secrets, which I don't do, I can't do, I wouldn't want to do if I could. So the first thing I have to do is set people's mind at rest and meet them as a person, meet them as a human being, and show them the respect of meeting them as a valuable human. And that sounds hugely arrogant, but to meet them person to person. It's just two human beings interacting. It's not me being above anybody or them being above or below. It's just two human beings, whoever they are, no matter what their position is. It's two human beings, and it's getting to know who they are, what it is that motivates them, what it is they want, whether for their business or for themselves or both. And then exploring, okay, what do you need here, and how can I go about providing that need? But it's the human to human connection first, and it's core to what I'm about, is helping people build exceptional relationships, and that has to start with how I present myself and a willingness to engage in that relationship, constructing, building, nurturing that relationship.
Going back a little bit to one of the themes that we, though, discussed earlier, was the idea that in order to really communicate and connect, a sense, and again, we're sort of circling around the same things here, but this is actually for a reason, that we have to be able to, particularly for large institutions like the Catholic Church, which we use as a hypothetical example, right, might need to move away from its gigantism or gigantism, however you pronounce it, its bigness, and focus more on the local and deal with the realities that people are actually facing. You also mentioned in passing that the minute people identify themselves as part of a tribe, there are those that are not necessarily going to be part of that tribe, and that can also sever connection. And so what you're talking about then is taking a very intentional approach to undoing whatever tribal barriers that we might have consciously or subconsciously put up, and that might be communicated either via face or via our body language, and then and you're leading by example here and purely seeing the other person for what they are. If I want to learn how to do that so that I can really help in my own way to chip away at the secret plague of alienation, what might be some things that I could do?
Wow. Okay. There's so many things to like reading a face, but it starts with the internal processing. Like we are, again, whether we realize it or not, our body is an antenna. Our whole body is an antenna. We have, it's like neuroscience has demonstrated, we have three brains. We have the one up here that we're most associated with using. Yeah. And we don't tend to be aware of, maybe we haven't been made aware of the fact that we have a brain in the heart, We have a brain in the gut, and I'm not talking about figurative, I'm talking about literally have brains in those areas. And there are far more, it has been measured that there are more signals going up from the heart brain to the head brain than vice versa. So there's a need for us as individuals in the best way we can, whatever that means for us, to start tuning into the body, because the body is continually communicating with us. The body is communicating so much about what's going on in the environment, what's true, what's not true, what's healthy, what's not healthy, etc., positive, negative, all those terms. And we need to take care of our gut as well, physically, mentally, and emotionally. And again, part of my background is in traditional Oriental medicine, where the understanding was that the mind and the body are one inseparable unit. So I've always understood that the state of the body is a representation of our mental and emotional health as well. So learning to be quiet, learning to pay attention to what our own body is telling us about who we are, whether we are fulfilling our purpose, whether we are living true to who we came to be, our true nature, and gradually unlearning the conditioning is part of it. That's the most essential part. The stuff about learning the technical aspects of the skill, that's the secondary bit, and it's the least important really, because the skills can be learned. But when we tune into our bodies and we allow that, we cultivate that awareness and strengthen that awareness that the body is an antenna. The body is constantly receiving information. Like how many people you meet somebody and you get a vibe from them. I like this person. Oh, I don't like that person. I don't know what it is, but it doesn't feel comfortable. Pay attention to those things. Pay attention. Your body is telling you, your body has its own wisdom, and your body is telling you something. It's not just down to, the visuals, and it's certainly important that we do not get hypnotized or seduced by smooth talking people or people who are very articulate or very technically accomplished, when what they're saying may not be congruent with their intention or their behavior.
Before I ask the next question, I'll ask a question before the next question. Am I correct in understanding that really what you're saying, due to the relationship that our gut has, which is where our food is processed, and where a lot of, again, and we've had other guests on this show, and it's been in the media pretty significantly, our gut health really reflects and can have a huge impact on our total health across the board. Yep. Are you saying that literally you can at least conceivably look at someone's face, and from maybe its things like its presentation or the way people carry themselves or maybe the lines on their face or whatever it is, you can actually tell whether they are in a state of physical equilibrium or not?
Yeah. Yes, absolutely.
That's pretty profound. Are you also saying that if there's not that equilibrium and we are attempting to put something else out in the world, if we are attentive or are in touch with this part of ourselves, we could save ourselves a lot of trouble, a lot of heartache, a lot of loss, a lot of toxicity.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah.
What if I don't have the ability to, what if I don't know, my gut never tells me anything. What if I'm someone like that? Okay.
What are you doing to maintain yourself? What brings you, and I'm not talking to you specifically, obviously, but if a person is in that state, whether it's man or woman, if somebody is in that place, what are you doing to take care of yourself physically, mentally, or emotionally? What are you putting into your body? Are you, for example, if any food you eat, are you really tasting it? Are you paying attention to are you putting care into the preparation or the presentation of the food, or are you just buying all processed food, which is unfortunately what a lot of people do, and certainly does not serve physical, mental, or emotional well-being? What are you doing? What are you doing to create joy? What are you doing to express whatever you see as and recognize as the best qualities of yourself? Are you doing kindness for anybody, including yourself? Are you expressing creativity in any way? What are you doing for your physical well-being? And it may be that you're only that your current state only allows you to do very small things, but are you doing them? Are you willing to do them? And are you willing? And if you're in that state, are you willing to persist in doing them? Small things on a consistent, regular basis to bring about change. And there's one of the guys I've spent a lot of time paying attention to over the last few years, a guy called Chase Hughes. He's a former Navy veteran in the US, and he's, to my mind so far, he's the guy who's the deepest insight into human behavior and reading the signs, not just faces, but body language and all of that. Right. He's an amazing guy. But one of the things he talks about, that discipline is a commitment to your future self. So what is it you want for yourself? What's the quality of life you want for yourself? And I'm not talking about a fantasy. I'm not talking about like being a millionaire, billionaire. But what's at least a reasonable level of improvement that you aspire to for yourself? And what's your commitment towards attaining that? And can you take, what's the first step you can take? And then are you willing to take the next step and the next step and the next step? Even if it seems like initially like it's going to be a long journey, but can you keep that vision fixed ahead of you, that it is so strong, it's drawing you forward?
Your client engagements, what do they look like as a practical matter with you using this skill that you've developed? Do you like sit and interview people and then come up with profiles? Do you put them in group settings? And what is exactly the profiling document or profiling? What do the profiling recommendations look like? Okay. What does someone do with the information that they get from you?
Okay. Yeah. It's probably changed a little bit since the pandemic. Like we've had the longest lockdown. We're not in lockdown now, but we had the longest lockdown in Europe. So a lot of what I was doing just kind of fell off a cliff initially, because of a significant part of what I was doing was sitting in on interviews for senior level roles. And typically what I would be introduced as a colleague or an associate. So the candidate or candidates would not be told exactly who I was or what I was there for. Right. So I would be there to assist the interviewer or the interview panel. And I might or might not speak during the interview. If I did speak, it would usually be to ask a question, which would be to alert anybody on my side of the table that there's a potential red flag here. But either way, I would write up a profile after the interview based on what I've observed and heard. And I would highlight particular questions. I would highlight particular areas of concern for the company then to decide. It's very clear, I do not advise the company don't hire the person or do or don't promote them. That is not for me to decide. But it's to give them information with which to work to determine whether the person is likely to be a good fit or the best fit for the particular role within the culture within the company.
What are some examples of what those reports might have said? Like, would they have said this person is too egotistical, or this person has a lot of fear, or this person is overly risky, or would they be something else altogether? This person has ethical issues. Like, what might be some of these things? And also positives too, like what sort of positive things might come up during those write-ups?
Okay. Yeah. I would write about the type of intelligence somebody is likely to bring to a project. So for example, if it's a more technical role, now I'm not technically minded. And I don't need to know anything about the technicalities of the role, but I can tell you who is. Yeah, but I can tell you who is more technically minded from looking at them. It will also be apparent in their bearing, in their body language, how they present themselves, but also in how they speak, not just what they say, but how they say it. It'll be in their tone of voice, the rhythm of speech. All of those things will be apparent. Whether people are particularly analytical or analytical to the point of being way too intense to really engage with other people. For example, if somebody's eyebrows sit, particularly if the eyebrows are thick and they sit really down close over the eyes, you can take it that this person is very intense. Very intense, to the point of being very impatient. They're usually not the best listeners. Invariably not the best listeners. They will often speak before their mind is fully engaged, and they will often finish. If you're talking to them, you need to speak fast, because that's the way their mind processes, and they will assume they know what you're going to say, and they will often answer a question before you've finished asking it. They will jump in. So things like that, for example, are very apparent, and that tells me that it's going to be a challenge for people to work with this person. And if they're going to be a senior leader, there's going to have to be I won't say a ring of protection around them, but the company's going to have to take it on board that listening is not their strength, and they may be over hasty and impulsive in their decision making,
right,
and maybe quite dogmatic. So there's so many things one can see that will influence or that indicative of how a person is likely to behave in a given situation. I've also worked in situations with I've had clients who were executive coaches, and the arrangement I would have with them is that when they reach an impasse with the client, they would send me a good facial shot of the client. No information beyond that, just the facial shot, and I would have to write up a profile on that. And there was one that particularly jumps out for me. To paraphrase, and I do tend to write in relatively diplomatic language, but of necessity, really. But I remember, to paraphrase, I think what I wrote about the guy was he overestimates his own intelligence, tends not to pay attention to detail, has problems delegating, and there was one other particular highlight, but I can't remember specifically. When I sent in the profile, my client, the executive coach, showed it to the company's CEO. The company's CEO said, "Yes, this is spot on. I thought the guy would change." It turned out the guy 3 months previous had been appointed as chief auditor of the company and had almost lost, and this was a financial services company in Dublin, had almost lost their license to trade because of an oversight. And it was only one of his subordinates spotted the oversight on Christmas Eve and saved the company. But the guy was the CEO's pet project. So he kept him in place.
Right. Wow. I'm sort of taking that in. Now, to the extent, let's say I were to hire you and you were to write up a report on me and then show it to me. To what extent are the characteristics that you're describing immutable? In other words, to what extent could I do something about it? Or am I going to look at this facial recognition or facial description and say, okay, that's who I am and whatever, now at least I know? Yeah. Well, to me, the one of the purposes of learning to read faces is to continue learning, and part of it is to learn about oneself. Like, one of the most important items of furniture in a home to me is a mirror. And I don't mean that out of vanity. In fact, quite the opposite on occasion. Because when I look in the mirror, I don't always like what I see. And I recognize, that's what that's telling me. I need to pay attention to that. So it's, interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. And the Chinese perspective is that there are no absolutes, no absolute positives, no absolute negatives, that everything contains the seeds of its opposite. So it's always, if we see a potential strength, then it's okay, am I using it? Or am I getting in the way of it? If I see an area of weakness, okay, what can I do? What can I do to strengthen that? What can I do to change it? So it's always like if you think in terms of the Chinese symbol of yin yang, you know, the yin yang symbol, the white whale with the black eye, the black whale with the white eye. We tend to see it as a static image, but it's actually not intended to be static. It's a dynamic image of constantly moving energy to complementary and antagonistic energy forces. So our face represents the life process, which is a process of constant change, constant challenge, constant learning, unlearning, doing, undoing, all of that. So we can absolutely, for example, and if I use myself as an example, you'll see I have one very deep vertical crease here between the eyebrows. Yeah. When I was growing up, I was a very insecure, uptight individual, very uptight individual. Mm-hmm. So I was really wound up. And when you see that line is not going to go away. That's an indication of, because it's so deep, when it's so deep like that, it tells you that there's a family trait of hypoglycemia, or tendency towards lower blood sugars. And if you're not and if you're not managing your blood sugar well, you're going to be angry, you're going to be uptight, you're going to be impulsive, impatient, irritated, all of those things. So if you're already uneasy with life, unsettled about life, it's going to be really exacerbated. So I don't particularly like the fact that I have the line, but it's a reminder that where I could go if I don't take care of myself.
Yeah. Yeah. And then that gives you the ability to manage. In other words, to translate from knowledge into actual wisdom. Yeah. I love it. Now, part of why I was looking away when you are and sort of thinking when you were talking about yin and yang was the digital era. Mm-hmm. You mentioned briefly that the Zoom world that we now live in and will probably not be going away anytime soon unless we're all in meta together somehow. How has that impacted what you do? And in particular, I found out yesterday that there is apparently some app on Zoom. I would never do this, but I'm not female. But some men would probably do this too. But apparently it allows you to, it somehow digitally puts makeup and lipstick on your face and dolls you up a little bit. And so how do you do that sort of assessment in digital environments generally? And then can you see through, or how do these beautification apps change the calculus?
Okay, I wasn't aware of that particular app, so I'll have to check that one out. But thank you. Well, thank you for the information. But yeah, we're all living on Zoom now, and one of the beauties of Zoom is the fact that it's allowed us to meet. It allows us to connect across the globe. So many of my strongest connections and strongest relationships now are with people I've never physically met. So that's amazing. That's part of the amazing gift, priceless gift of Zoom, you know. But when I'm seeing like a screen full of faces like that, even when I'm seeing like thumbnail images as such, they're all revealing something to me. And when I'm working with a group, I will invariably use speaker view. So whoever is speaking, they're in their main focus. So even where I haven't come across men that I'm conscious of wearing makeup yet, but who knows? But certainly when women are wearing makeup and powdered cheeks or rouge or whatever it might be, it's still not really covering up that much, because the first thing is actually the most important thing is the eyes anyway. And even if people are wearing masks, the eyes are whether you think in terms of the eyes are the windows to the soul, the eyes will tell you so much about where the person has come from emotionally, where they're at, and where they're likely to go. Not so much their where they're likely to go in terms of career, but the level of drive, the level of commitment they have to really fulfilling their purpose. And it's not unusual that both eyes give you different messages. Like when we look at, oh yeah, when we divide the face into two vertical halves, the right side of the person's face reveals their public persona, the left side reveals their private persona.
Really?
Yeah. So if you're, just for practice, if you get a photo of a prominent celebrity politician, a good facial shot, cover one side of the face with your hand and ask yourself what message the visible eye is giving you, and then change sides and ask, is the other eye giving you the same message? You'll often find it's like looking at two very different people.
Really?
Yeah.
That's fascinating. Wow. I love it. So how do you not get overwhelmed just walking around seeing faces everywhere? Dublin's a crowded city.
Oh yeah.
And you mentioned places like London earlier. I'm like, come on.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, well, when I was training in London, I was studying like 4 nights a week and most weekends, but I was also working with one of my teachers in his health food store. And as soon as somebody would come in the store, he would ask, okay, what's his condition? What's her condition? So it was full on, total 100% immersion. And at one point, I'd never done any psychedelics, but I had friends who'd taken acid, peyote, mescaline, what have you, and told me about the experiences. And one day I remember walking down the local high street, and it was like all I could see were waves of psychedelic illness coming towards me. And it was the most disturbing experience. Yeah. I don't know what I did to switch it off, but some internal switch clicked anyway, and I switched it off. So when I'm walking in a city, I'll be how can I put it? I'll be in a state of subconscious awareness in terms of am I getting vibes from somewhere, good, bad, or indifferent. But really, I prefer to be largely unconscious in that regard and just go about my business.
I would imagine you kind of have to, sort of thinking about it and listening to you talk about it.
Yeah.
People are going to be very curious about you when they listen to this interview or watch it. Where can they go to find out more about you or your services? Okay.
The best way to make contact with me is via LinkedIn. That's where I'm most active. I do have a website, which is clearsightcommunications.com, but I'm lagging behind in really paying attention and updating my services and all of that, because I'm most active on LinkedIn and then various networks. I do have a Facebook profile, but really LinkedIn is the place to get me.
And by the way, I would imagine that this whole conversation is a good reminder to be thinking about what we're putting up on LinkedIn.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and that's I mentioned working with photos earlier, and that came about through a friend of mine, a business connection. He had been approached by somebody looking. This guy wanted him to invest in some new project or other, and he wasn't sure about it. He just he just wasn't sure. So he asked me, could I tell much from a photo? And I hadn't really paid much attention to photos other than for demonstration purposes. So he sent me the guy's LinkedIn photo, and it wasn't even a great quality one, but a number of things jumped out at me. I've actually since got to know this other guy, by the way. I never told him I looked at his photo. I could see there was a reason for doubts. So I told my friend, and my friend normally likes to make quick decisions. So I told him, I want you to act out of character here. I want you to be really pedantic. And only if you get every I dotted and every T crossed to your satisfaction, go ahead. Only then. And some short way into their conversation, it became apparent this was not a runner. So my friend backed out, and he learned subsequently that several other people had been burnt and lost significant amounts of money.
That Wow. Yeah. Now, look, anyone who's been in business, that's one of the ultimate fears that you have, is that you enter into some sort of strategic partnership or you bring someone into your circle and lose money. And I will be the first to say, I've done it. I've entered into business relationships that have cost me financially dearly, because looking back on it, I may or may not have perceived something in the face, but I did have something inside that basically was like a red light.
Yeah.
And I ignored it.
Yeah.
Joseph, it has been great taking a ride with you today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you,
For
Scott.
everyone tuning in, no, it was awesome. For everyone tuning in, if you like this episode, please be sure to subscribe and leave a review on Apple or comment on YouTube. And I will see you next time for another ride down the Purpose Highway. When you're racing down the Purpose Highway, we want to make sure you're healthy and happy every step of the way. That's why we're proud to partner with It's NOLA, 21st century plant-based healthy granola snack bites made with real ingredients and audacious flavor. It's NOLA crafts small batch hand-rolled granola balls that are vegan, gluten-free, and naturally low in sugar. It's NOLA's delightful bites come in 3 flavors: luscious cranberry coconut, sassy mango masala, and dark, decadent, chewy chocolate. It's NOLA is available to both individual customers and for wholesale accounts at itsnola.com. That's ITSNOLA.com. Guests on this show are already enjoying this delicious snack. Check out It's NOLA's website for yourself and find out how good it is.